I'm 31 now, and I've grown up in many ways, and you have to be more politically aware in a day and age like this. It's almost impossible to close your eyes to it.
It was a time of considerable fracturing.
And you read in the newspapers that the war's over, but the war's not over.
You have to understand where the Mike Douglas Show sat in culture.
Here is John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
It was the most popular show in daytime television.
When President Nixon leaves for Peking on Thursday,
Yoko said, we're doing this show on Mike Douglas. We're having Bobby Seale and Jerry Rubin. And I'm going like, what?
Here is Ralph Nader.
Is he running for president?
No.
John Lennon and Yoko Ono didn't want us to talk about their music. That spoke for itself.
What would you like to talk about this week, John?
Love, peace, communication,
Drugs.
Drugs, anything.
When I got to the studio, I got a glimpse of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I said, oh my goodness, this is exciting.
They did have an agenda, and the agenda had to do with making the world better.
Yeah, it was something they were trying to get away with.
Well, young people are known to be cynical, and I say to them, nobody's smart enough to be a pessimist.
Imagine there's no heaven. People tend to think that somebody will save them, and there's only people can save us, only us all deciding to do something about anything, whatever it is. Just even making that decision that I want to do something is a start.
Imagine all the people living for today.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
This was a fun documentary to watch. I certainly remember this. This from, it's just such a TV, what would you call it, event, which is the week that John and Yoko guest hosted on the Mike Douglas Show back in 1972. And I remember it, and I'm not sure if I can actually recall from my childhood seeing it in part or whatever, because as a little kid, you get home from school, and it wouldn't be unusual to put on, let's say, the Mike Douglas Show back in the day.
Well, it was kind of an urban legend for most people. Some people heard it happened, but very, very few people actually saw it. That's actually not the truth. 40 million people saw it when it happened, but it wasn't us. It wasn't people 50 years later who were directing movies and doing podcasts. So this is reintroducing this very potent week of television and recontextualizing it for the present day, for the present moment of this apocalyptic 2024 election.
Yes, because I guess a adjacent subject that's grappled with in the film, which is called Daytime Revolution, by the way, is the fact that the Nixon White House went after Lennon, and he was here as he was never an
He was a
immigrant.
British citizen. He was
a British citizen who was here on go ahead.
Yeah, he was here on a visa that could be revoked. He was here conditionally. Yoko Ono was an American citizen. She had married Terry Cox, who was an American, but John didn't. And because of the potency and the fact that John Lennon and Yoko Ono delivered such a persuasive and anarchic political message during this week when they hijacked the Mike Douglas Show, that freaked out Richard Nixon, who was known for his paranoia because he was running for re-election that year. And in February of '72, he was sufficiently freaked out that he was at that very moment, teeing up the Watergate burglaries to do whatever he could to steal the election. So as soon as Roger Ailes, the guy who invented Fox TV, who was in the studio, got back to Richard Nixon and said, hey, this could be a problem, Nixon alerted the Justice Department and the games began.
So Ailes actually was he kind of acting in a double agent kind of capacity?
Well, he had a relationship with Mike Douglas, was one of Mike
Yeah.
Douglas's producers. He used his powers for evil, not good, when he helped Nixon get elected for the first time in 1968. He masterminded and micromanaged Richard Nixon's all of his television appearances. And that's what put Roger Ailes on the map. There was a book by Joe McGinnis called The Selling of a President that described Ailes. So in 72, I think he wasn't fully employed by the Douglas show, but he certainly had drop by the studio anytime you want privileges, and that's exactly what he did. So he was there. Ralph Nader remembers him there. Ralph Nader remembers him stroking his chin and saying, what's going on here? And the rest literally is history.
I'm trying to figure some sort of tie connection, between Trump and Nixon.
There's a lot of connections. Trump's running for re-election. Trump is deeply paranoid. Trump is willing to do whatever it takes to subvert the election, legally or illegally.
Right.
And in my humble opinion, Trump would equally be a catastrophe for America than Richard Nixon was in his second term. Though in hindsight, Richard Nixon looks like a Lincoln-esque statesman in comparison to Donald Trump. But that's that's not what we're here to talk about. But
no,
we are in some ways here to talk about it because the entire point of Daytime Revolution coming out October 9th, 1 month before the election on John's 84th birthday, was to repeat the experiment and repeat the content of what John and Yoko put out for America in 1972, so much of which is astonishingly relevant today. This was a deliberate thing. This film and its release is a political act, very intentionally.
Sort of almost like a what is it called? The Trojan horse, though, of like this so relatively benign talk show with a relatively
extremely affable. Mike Douglas is.
Yeah.
He invited John, Yoko, Jerry Rubin, Bobby Seale, all of these radical ideas and radical music into his living room, which is how he considered his set, and by proxy, the living room of 40 million mainstream, middle class, middle of the road Americans. And he sort of turned over the mics and said, go, what do you have to say? And Mike is brilliant in this at articulating and hosting and enabling John and Yoko to espouse their beliefs. So it's extraordinary, not only that John and Yoko did it, but that Mike Douglas and his production team let John and Yoko do it.
Yeah, and that Mike Douglas made it sort of, if Mike Douglas was welcome, then he kind of was the avatar for those 40 million Americans, those average folks that, may not necessarily or normally have understood where John Lennon and Yoko Ono were coming from. But, he really introduced this aspect to those guys, to John and Yoko, to this audience. And also, I just was curious to know what you thought was going on in Mike Douglas's head, like why he would have made this gesture. It wasn't just ratings.
It was partly ratings, partly I think he had Yoko on as a guest and knew that she didn't breathe fire and wasn't a dragon lady and wasn't going to upset things. So he had trust in them. And he thought it would be good television. And maybe he was open to persuasion. And who wouldn't want to have John Lennon in your living room for a week? So there are a lot of complex reasons, but what's surprising is just sort of the trust, openness of both the Douglas team and John and Yoko and the guests, just to let's all get together and see what happens. And it's that openness and democracy and communicative ability that I think needs to be celebrated and recognized especially at this moment in American history, at this juncture in American history.
It was also really it was really nice to see how open also and connective that both John and Yoko were. They a complete absence of any kind of snarky type of more condescension at all. There was zero from what I could tell.
And you're
It
telling
just
it
seemed-
correctly, that John Lennon, you tell me, John never looked better. He looks great. He sounds great. He's funny. He's comfortable. He's honest. He plays great music. He cooks and cuts cabbage with Chuck Berry. He's just couldn't be in a better space. And John Lennon, if you caught him on the wrong day or the wrong year or the wrong month, could be not quite so easy. So this film really captures not just this political moment, but it captures, I think, John Lennon as good as he ever was, as far as a comfortable in his own skin and hitting on all creative cylinders.
What was the motivating factor? You say it was a political act on your part, putting this film out, but I'm just curious to know the sort of origin story for you of how you came to choose to make Daytime Revolution.
Well, I just knew this. I knew these. I remember that this happened in the first place. I was aware that in the late 90s, they had put out a 5 VHS, remember those? VHS set of the uncut shows. So I knew that they were out there and that they were available. Somebody had released these films commercially, or these shows commercially, which meant that they existed and that the rights could be obtained. So right there I said, okay, I'm a Beatle fan. I'm a student of contemporary history and a definite specialist minor in Richard Nixon. I had produced the movie The U.S. versus John Lennon, which documented his deportation agonies, of which this played a small part.
Mm-hmm.
So I not only knew the content, but I also had worked with Yoko directly to sanction and endorse the film. So I guess the question would be, why did I wait so long to make the movie? And the answer is, the timing is everything. But after the events of the last 6 years, or 8 years since the Mango Mussolini has been doing his thing, I felt now more than ever would be a time this film needed to be seen and appreciated. So we timed it, as I said, for the election time. And if it's perceived as, quote, partisan, all I would say is, well, there's no explicit politics in it at all. It documents what actually happened in a studio in Philadelphia in 1972. But if you want to read into it, that the things that were said and the declaration of independence and creativity still is relevant today, good. That is a
good way to read
message.
into it. Good thing
Absolutely.
to read into it.
I have no issues with that whatsoever.
Yeah, you could have made this completely just archive. Instead, you chose to seek out a number of the other guests that were there during the week that we're talking about back in 1972 when John and Yoko co-hosted the Mike Douglas Show. There was the macrobiotic cook or chef, for lack of another term. There was what was it? The
avant-garde musician David Rosenboom. There was one half of Yellow Pearl, Nobuko Miyamoto, who is just fantastic in the film.
Right. Yep.
And Ralph Nader, who's in his
Mr. Nader.
90s. Ralph showed up, and Ralph doesn't do TV interviews at all anymore, but he consented to show up and do it. And Ernie DeMassa, who is pretty much the only surviving member of Mike Douglas's team, one of the last of the people who were there in the studio, young Ernie DeMassa. Mm-hmm. So my decision was they were there as both participants and audience, and I only wanted to hear from them since they were a direct connection to what happened in that studio. I like to think that I'm not a documentary filmmaker. I'm in the transportation business, very simply. And the goal was to transport people back to that moment in time, to experience those shows and that content in much the same way it was experienced then, to try to duplicate the experience in an hour and 48 minutes that someone would have had to have watched a week's worth of 5 90-minute programs, and to have the integrity of the original 5 shows carry across today. So that was the intent. How close I came to pulling it off is another issue, but that was certainly the intent.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what went into finding those folks?
It was tough. I had the guest list, and we had to track them down, do some sleuthing. Better living through Google. We were able to track the people down. Almost without exception, nobody had seen those shows since they did them 50 years ago. So part of what we did when we filmed the documentary, we made sure to screen the segment that they appeared on and film them, the people watching it in real time, to get their reaction today. And that also brought them back in time. So as I said, I'm in the transportation business, and I built the Wayback Machine. Fans of Rocky and Bullwinkle know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I'd put them in the Wayback Machine, watch the film, and then have them talk about their experience. So it was a rather simple process, but it managed to kind of capture, I think, the moment. And if the film rises or falls, I'm hoping it's rises and falls based on what we captured and the content of the shows, and less about the craft of the filmmaker, which to me is secondary. My goal as a filmmaker is to get out of the way of the material and just make it simple and refined, and let the audience watch it and take away whatever reactions they want. So turning the question to you, you've seen the film. What were your impressions watching these things today? I mean, I'm curious from you're precisely the audience we're trying to reach with this material.
Well, obviously you reached me on a practical level, and also you reached me on an emotional level. It's almost too far back for me to feel nostalgic per se, though there's certainly some level of nostalgia there. But it's just for also a kind of a cultural history buff. It really was satisfying, and it was just, I had not seen that much of that content before of that week. I'd seen some, I'm sure, little bits, but not so much. You show substantial sections of the 5 days of that week, and so that was very satisfying. And I was just really kind of really, like you pointed out, I was kind of moved by Mike Douglas in the sense of that the way he navigated the situation, which could have been extremely awkward. And I'm not saying there wasn't some tension there and some uncomfortableness at certain points. Again, didn't see the entire episodes, but I was really impressed by his choice to do that in the first place, and then just to see these friendships kind of ferment. It was clear that John and Yoko had developed an affection for him. It starts with Douglas singing you'll
the great John Lennon classic, Michelle. Yeah.
Right, Michelle. And it's like and I don't mean to insult Mike Douglas, but his singing was very I don't know, cheesy, whatever word you want to say, schmaltzy. I think that's fair.
Yeah, but that was, again, that reminds you the audience he was reaching for, right?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
That
perfectly nice voice, but it's kind of certainly a schmaltzy version of a Beatles song. And I just really appreciated that, that John just, complimented him, and then it was the end of it. I'm sure John would have preferred some other version.
Well, what's
but
great
he just took the high road.
But John Lennon, being a compulsive truth teller, when Mike says, "Oh, I played that song, and did you write it?" He sort of says, "Well, no, that I may have helped on the middle eight," which is probably being generous. That was
generous.
But it was that was a Paul song, but he didn't want Mike
to be embarrassed.
To be embarrassed.
And what Mike Douglas is going to know, they're all co-credited, right? To Lennon and McCartney. Yeah, they're Lennon. As far as he knows, they're Lennon and McCartney songs, right?
Right. So he didn't know. It's an innocent mistake.
And Lennon didn't throw him under the bus, and it was showed what a classy guy he was. And Yeah, I just thought this was a very satisfying experience watching that, and I could have watched a far longer version. Eric is what I'm saying.
Well, as I say, go on eBay, and if you want, you can track down
The VHS tapes.
crank up the VHS machine and watch the VHS tapes because they are out there. And look, it was enormously expensive and time consuming to restore the footage like we did. So if you watch what we dealt, the material we worked from, and I hope you've been supplied the before and after, and feel free to use that in this final thing to show people the before and after. That would not be practical to do it for full 90 minutes. It took a year and a half of pretty much constant work to make the footage look as good as we did, and that's only 80 minutes, 75 minutes of the original shows.
Those and they were like an hour, right? The shows?
Hour and a half each.
They were 90 minutes.
90 minutes long, 7.5 hours of material that we boiled down to about 70. And we wanted to make it feel, and I think based on your answer to my question, we wanted the viewer to feel like they'd seen the shows, have that feeling of satisfaction that they'd seen 5 of these shows with context and annotation and discussion from the people in them, and they weren't really missing anything, and that they weren't bored. And if you say, I wish I could see more, then I think I've done my job, because we're not doing a 6-hour series on this. We're doing a compact delivery system of a feature documentary, 1 hour and 48 minutes, best appreciated in a theater, best appreciated on John Lennon's birthday, but they'll also have their life in home video and whatever afterlife they may have in the streaming audience. But that was the delivery mechanism that we chose.
Talk about, you mentioned that there's this screening on his 84th, what would have been his 84th birthday.
Will you still need him when he's 84? Will you still need him when he's 84? And my answer is yes, we will, and we do.
Talk about the what is taking place on October 9th, which would have been his 84th.
Or screening, it's in 50 theaters. I don't have a listed, but check them out. I'm sure it's the information
like
is
50
accessible.
cities,
50 cities. And if it finds purchase, it'll go wider and longer, but we're certainly launching and premiering on Wednesday, October 9th, which is not the traditional night you premiere a film, but it seemed appropriate. And in the world of modern day media and modern day theatrical experiences, there really is no rule book anymore. So we're having some fun breaking the rules and trying something different on an appropriate day, hopefully in an audience with your fellow Americans, fellow Beatle fans, fellow open-minded citizens who want to go back in time and want to see what John and Yoko had to say about the world then and how that applies to the world today.
Again, that will take place in a theater likely near you. Where are you, by the way? You're on the West Coast?
I'm in the People's Republic of Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm. But so will you have to travel to San Francisco?
Nope, it's opening here in Santa Cruz. I requested it, and we're the prime audience for this film. Believe me.
I believe you. Lastly, I just wanted to ask you, for personal reasons, and I realized my connection to the, as you named in the Mango Mussolini, but the was that he is a byproduct of the ales, in the sense that Fox sort of created this Trump that we know.
Well, he created the divisiveness and the polarization, an alternate media, an alternate world of media where
and a cult following.
Cult following. So yes, Ailes ironically executed all of this. So the fact that his boots were on the ground in that studio did not escape my notice. Let's put it that way.
Can you just let's end it though on a more positive note than on that guy. Here's a better guy who has, through his works, has saved probably, I'm guessing, at least tens of thousands of lives as a result of seatbelt laws that he, you could say is responsible for making happen, and that's Ralph Nader. And I just want to know how that came about, how you got him, and what, if there was any kind of takeaway from your experience.
Ralph was essential. If we couldn't have gotten Ralph Nader, the film would have been a shadow of what it was. And Ralph was one of the last interviews we got, and I'm forever grateful for him for doing it. And he was better than we can imagine. I had to do the interview, not unlike how we're doing it now, via Zoom with a professional crew, but Ralph was justifiably very, very concerned about COVID. So he was in a different room, very antiseptic, and I had to do the interview by remote control. And I didn't know, I think I talked to him once, but I didn't know how it was going to go. And from moment one, Ralph just crushed it. Boom, boom, boom. Insightful, great quotes, totally present, everything you'd possibly want from a guy like Ralph Nader. And if there's anything I hope this film does, is it reminds people that Ralph's an American hero, and the fact that Al Gore ran one of the most inept presidential campaigns in America history and lost to George W. Bush is not Ralph Nader's problem.
Thank you. I was the only one saying that years ago myself.
No, that's absurd and obscene that Ralph Nader has been blamed for that by people who don't know history and haven't studied what happened in the Gore campaign. And if this film does anything while Ralph's around to see it, I want people to say, man, you're great. We love you. All is forgiven. Come back.
Erik Nelson is the director of Daytime Revolution, which is going to be having a nationwide theatrical event on what would have been John Lennon's 84th birthday this October the 9th, which is a Wednesday, as you pointed out, where she'll be playing on the big screen in 50 cities around the country. And we'll keep people abreast of if and when it goes wider, and what whatever the trajectory this film is on. I'd love to help in any way I can get the word out. So thank you for coming on here and talking about
a pleasure,
John and Yoko. And I've been back in the vinyl, so maybe not VHS, but at least I'm somewhat analog in the sense that I'm back to finding mono versions of Beatles records. Yeah, it's such a pleasure.
Well, if you find that one where they're dressed up and there's in butcher's outfits, I'll take that off your hand for like $10 or something.
Oh, sure. That sounds fair.
I'll give you 15 for it. Okay. How's that?
Oh, okay. That seems fair.
Thank you. Good.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah. Nice meeting you. Yeah. Look forward to seeing it out. And it's nice to talk to people who've seen the movie. Because it didn't go to a festival, because I have not seen it in an audience. The only people I know who've seen the film outside of the people who made it are folks like yourself. So that's why I'm sort of routinely asking people, well, what did you think? Is it working? Because you don't know. You just put these things together.
You're in a vacuum a bit, or a void or something. Eric?
All right. It's been a pleasure.
It has.
Sorry I was late. I just didn't.
Oh, no, don't worry about
it. Was some crossed wires there. I didn't have the Zoom link, and I thought the interview had been postponed. So
no
we're good.
Worries. Well,
all right.
Thank you for coming on. Glad to
my
meet
pleasure.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye.